My apologies everyone for double bill for top 10 Thursdays. Was meant to come out yesterday but never got around to it. So without further ado, we're going to start off today with the top 10 mythological creatures. So I'm going to of course give you guys the quick rundown of the list right after the intro is played. Now that I have my apologies for the video being so belated out of the way. So no doubt you're wondering what all the characters in front of you have in common. Well, it's because they're all part of the theme of this here top 10 video, you could say, and that's based around mythological creatures, since Skylanders is a fantasy-based franchise, and of course, with fantasies come mythological creatures, mind you, so I thought it would be fun to create a top 10 based around mythological creatures and their representations in Skylanders, because several Skylanders, to fit into that fantasy aesthetic even, are based on said mythological creatures. And all of the characters before you are not on this list for one specific reason: the lack of uniqueness and distinguishability. We have 3 elf characters which all look virtually the same, and then we have 5 rock characters even that are even worse. So sure, whilst all of them are based on mythological creatures, that being elves and rock golems alike, because there is no uniqueness and no distinguishability to their designs, it just doesn't make them eligible for the list, in my personal opinion, since that's one of the main factors going into the placements upon this list. That, as well as the design of the character, how well they represent the mythological creatures at hand, or how well they can combine several different elements of different mythological creatures to make an overall fantastic looking design. So because of that, the gameplay is a little less important in this top 10. However, it is still taken into account, as well as the personality of these characters. So all in all, we're looking at this top 10 list as more of an objective pointer. So I'm looking at these characters as how great do they represent the mythological character at hand, and how well does that impact their design overall, mind you. So with all of that out of the way, of course, there are a lot of subjective opinions as well as objective facts in this video. So hopefully you all can agree with me, and if not, let me know how wrong I am in the comment section below. But without further ado, we're going to get into this top 10 countdown. Starting us off at number 10, we have Blades, who is a dragon, one of the classical, most recognised mythological creatures out there, because they are literally giant, fire-breathing lizards with, of course, the capabilities of flight and most of the time firepower. However, in myths, they have all sorts of different powers, and, you know, them having sharp talons and blades all over their bodies is common in mythology, mind you. And Blades, of course, takes advantage of all of that, having armor that's sharp, mind you. That's where it gets his name from, of all things. But what I love about Blades is the hint of irony his design emphasizes, you could say, since knights in folklore are sent to slay dragons in order to save a village. So the fact that Blades combines a dragon's design with a knight's design, for knights being the ones who slay dragons in folklore, it's just kind of ironic how, you know, he's a dragon who's combined himself with design elements of a knight that would commonly be known to go out of their way to slay creatures like himself, mind you. So that hint of irony is what makes this design a little more interesting and worthy of being included in this list as the number 10 spot, mind you. So the reason why Blades was as low as number 10 on the list is because he's a dragon Skylander, and believe me, in Skylanders there is a huge plethora of dragons. In fact, Spyro's Adventure dedicated itself to giving us a dragon for every element. But as I digress, everyone's favourite phrase, our number 9 spot even, is a lot more unique, coming in the form of Hoodsicle, who represents the mythological creature known as the Grim Reaper. Which I know what you're thinking there is another Skylander design that represents the same creature, that being Grim Creeper, which is why Hoodsicle is lower than he could have been otherwise, due to a lack of distinguishedness and uniqueness, especially when you compare him to Grim Creeper, since the two seem highly similar base, and that makes Hoodsicle come off as a little less inspired. But let me explain to you as to why Hoodsicle is our one on the list right here and not Grim Creeper, once of course my camera focuses in on them, mind you. But when it comes to the Grim Reaper's design, you might notice that Grim Creeper resembles it much less because it's far more kid-friendly. It doesn't take as many risks as Hoodsicle, because Hoodsicle, not only in a design standpoint, but on a personality standpoint as well, is a lot more dark. Excuse the pun, since that is his element, but either way, apart from that, he's also more brooding, and his personality is more oriented around death, and of course, taking the souls of his victims, which is a far more mature theme, and so that makes the Hoodsicle far more distinguishable because of it, because he's definitely one of the more darker, less light-hearted Skylanders, especially in comparison to Grim Creeper, who, like I said earlier, has more of a light-hearted, child-friendly design with brighter colours, a more colourful scythe, a more, child-friendly expression as he has a mouth and a face that's genuinely smiling towards you. So naturally, because of that, Hoodsicle is a better representation here, so let's get Grim Creeper out of here, since Hoodsicle has, of course, a double-bladed scythe, a moveset that's dark, and of course, ironically enough, revolves more around the undead than Grim Creeper, despite the darkness in his element. And overall, just makes for a great rep of the Grim Reaper because his design is far more similar, it takes a lot more risks in the design, it's a lot more mature, and because of that, it makes Hoodsicle the more memorable of the two characters, in my personal opinion even. That, and he's newer, so he's fresher in my mind. And he's just the better rep on a personality and design-driven standpoint. At number 8, we have Sonic Boom, who represents the mythological creature known as the Griffin. Now, the Griffin is notorious in its design for having a lion's head as well as a bird's body and a snake's tail. And that's exactly what Sonic Boom possesses, so automatically on a design standpoint, she is an excellent representative of the mythological creature, possessing the same design implementations. And of course, because of that, her character is actually really, really cool. You can see the snake-esque tail on the back, although it resembles more of a lion than it does a snake. So the representation there was slightly lost with Sonic Boom, but apart from that, her wings are still glorious and a very significant part to her design, as they are for the Griffin. But overall, her abilities don't really reflect that much of the Griffin either. She's only above Hoodsicle because of the fact that she's more unique when you compare her to the rest of the cast of Skylanders, since there is no other Griffin representation in the entirety of the Skylanders cast, mind you. But if Hoodsicle was the only Grim Reaper, I guarantee you that he would have been taking over Sonic Boom's spot with his more distinguishing personality traits paralleling that of a mythological creature even that he represents. But yeah, that basically justifies why Sonic Boom is here at number 8, mind you, barely edging out over Hoodsicle. Coming in at number 7 is Slamban, who kind of represents both the Abominable Snowman as well as the Yeti. And he's got a really unique design amongst the Skylanders cast, since he has 4 arms rather than 2, and there's few characters who possess that very distinguishing physical trait, mind you. So that makes Slamban very unique amongst the cast, and because of that, you can easily pick him out on the display. He's distinguishable and memorable. And that automatically jumps him up a few factors, that and also the combination of his Yeti and Abominable Snowman based designs is what makes that design so distinguishing and memorable that I was alluding to earlier. So yeah, that's why Slamban finds himself here at number 7 on the list. Angels are based as mythological creatures. It just so happens that their fantasy is based around religion most of the time. It's what's known as a religious fantasy, you could even say. But regardless, when it comes to Nightlight and his representation of the angel, is pretty accurate. I mean, he does have a mask that represents that of an owl more so than an angel, so that isn't the most accurate of reflections in his design, but everything else, from the wings to the glitter to make him shine and look more holy with his colour palette being so white and gold based, it's very religious and very much represents the light, which angels tend to represent, at least that of the good variation. So In fact, that Nightlight has a very clear symbolic nature behind him when it comes to his representation of angels, and that combined with his design looking similar to that and his colour palette also representing that symbolicness that I was alluding to. That's what puts Nightlight at number 6 on the list right here. Coming in at number 5 we have Wolfgang. Now the main problem with Wolfgang is that his traits don't necessarily line up with the mythological creature he's representing, that being the werewolf, since he's not human by day and then werewolf by night. However, everything else about him, including his design, is very werewolf-esque. He still howls at the moon and of course has a very dark and intimidating voice as a werewolf would have, because in most stories that they are included in, most fantasies, they have a dark and brooding voice just as Wolfgang does. And on top of that, he also has the design of your traditional werewolf with, the shorter legs and the really big buff upper body, the outer proportions to make it look more cartoony and just to add to the fantasy element of it all, because of course it looks so unhumanoid. The proportions at hand, mind you, that it just makes Wolfgang all the more distinctive for it. Now, there are other wolf characters in Skylanders, but Wolfgang definitely edges them out as the better werewolf representation, just because of his design matching werewolves in a more of a colour-based standpoint, and his personality as well, with of course his howling, particularly that towards the moon, mind you, and his proportions as well, representing that of a werewolf more accurately, unlike Flairwolf, who is more of your traditional wolf over a werewolf, you could say. Next up we have Boomer, who's representing the mythological creature known as the Trolls. Now what's so great about Boomer is that not only do they give him a really awesome design with him being a dynamite-loving troll, and that makes his personality very, very distinguishable, you could say, with his love of blowing stuff up. It made him the highlight, you could say, of several distinctive Spyro's Adventure trailers, mind you, where his solution to everything was, well, to blow it up, as one could presume.
Skylanders, the amazing new video game where toys come to life. Let's go, Skylanders, yeah!
Zook's gotta get through that gate.
Blow it up!
Wait, he's got the key.
Who cares? Blow it up!
Zook's in.
Now he has to get over that wall.
New idea. Blow it up!
Is that your answer for everything?
I couldn't hear you because it got blown up! Skylanders, you can start your adventure with the starter pack. Rated everyone, 10 and up. Some toys and consoles sold separately.
But moving on to why Boomer is such a great representation of his mythological creature, and that's because the design of Boomer and his inclusion as a scholar rather than a villain is what allowed for developers, you could say, to take full advantage of his mythological creature-based roots, because most trolls and Skylanders are villains. They fight for chaos and you need to go through and defeat them. However, Boomer took a different path and became a Skylander instead. And so that makes him unique amongst the Skylanders cast, because he represents a species which is normally villainous in Skylanders, and shows us that even for villainous characters still have potential to become good and to turn into heroic Skylanders, you could say. And so naturally, they took the mythological creature as the troll, that's traditionally known for doing wrong and, making you pay tolls for crossing bridges and all, which is also taken advantage in Skylanders. So for traditional troll-based personalities definitely live within Boomer, but still they take that personality trait one step further to, of course, subvert your expectations and make Boomer more surprising, more memorable because of it, because rather than being a villainous troll, instead he's heroic. And so that spin on the entirety of the traditional troll archetype, you could say, and the fact that it contrasts that so heavily with the other trolls through Skylanders that are taking more full advantage of the trolls' roots in mythology, is what makes Boomer so distinguishable and just so well executed above all, you could say, putting him at number 4 and making him more unique and distinctive because of it. Never did I ever expect Nightmare to edge out Nightlight on the top 10 list, but here we are with Nightmare, of course, representing one of my personal favourite mythological designs, that being for Centaur, since she is indeed half horse, half human, as the mythological folklore would suggest. Now, when it comes to Nightmare, I have no problems with the design itself, because as you can tell, it is awesome. It has a huge amount of detail. She has a ponytail and a nice hairy tail on the back of a horse, which is, of course, accurate to the legends themselves. A pose, which is also accurate, since it's a very notorious victory pose amongst centaurs in artwork that can be creative them and all. And centaurs themselves often have huge weapons, such as spears, bow and arrows, and in Nightmare's case, that massive sword, which is where my main problems with her gameplay come in, because, you know, her movement is kind of jank, her hitbox is too large, so her sword being as short range as it is, even with the increase in power per hit, doesn't justify how easy it is for Nightmare to get hit by just about anything and everything, how hard it is to maneuver with her. And so with a larger damage output, I could see myself enjoying this character, and if her horn actually did something in-game. But, you know, we're putting the gameplay aside for this video and focusing solely on, you know, her design and all. And when it comes to the design of a moveset, it definitely is well designed. The animations look like that of a centaur, as, you know, for legs kick up, and charging animations in particular are very accurate to how centaurs would charge into battle with great speed and power, mind you. But moving back to the design right here, it's so well textured. When you rub your hand along the ponytail and the tail on the back of a centaur, it feels like real hair and all. So the amount of detail they packed into this figurine, from the glitter to make it really stand out, for texturing and all that, just makes this figurine very, very distinguishable and very, very memorable, even because there's no other Skylander that, you know, ever so slightly resembles Nightmare. She truly distinguishes herself from the rest of the cast, giving her a worthy bronze medal upon this list right here. Now we move back to the Dragon Skylanders with Sunburn right here. Now, when it comes to Blades, it might seem pretty far-fetched that Ian talked about his irony about how he's a dragon dressed up as a knight, despite the fact that knights are notoriously for characters that go around slaying dragons in the classical folklores, mind you. But when it comes to Sunburn, he doesn't have that strong sense of irony. But what he does have is a combination of a phoenix and a dragon within his design, and the execution of those two elements is perfect. He has the colour palette and the physical traits of a phoenix, that being the red and the yellows in his colour palette, the kind of like flaming feathered long tail and the sharp talons on the end right here. It just means that he's a great combination of both a dragon and a phoenix, and not to mention him being of the fire element further emphasizes that combination, because he has the huge sheer firepower of a dragon, and phoenixes are notorious for being associated with fire, because when they die, their ash is burnt, and from of the burning of those ashes, the phoenix rises again. It's rebirthed through fire, you could say. So the symbolicness behind the exact element chosen for Sunburn, combine that with, of course, the colour palette and the combination of the two mythological creatures being put into one awesome design, is what makes Sunburn so distinguishable and so incredible on a design standpoint, even if I'm not a huge fan of his gameplay. But I can tell you this much, Sunburn's gameplay is definitely starting to grow on me. I do really like his teleporting ability and the fact that he emerges from a flame, similar to how a phoenix would emerge from the ashes during its rebirth animation. So even Sunburn's animations tailor back towards the abilities of a phoenix, making him the perfect representation of both the dragon and the phoenix.
Now, number one, surprise, surprise, is going to another Dragon Skylander and another Air character at that, just because I suppose Air has so many great characters to represent mythological creatures. But as we move on to talk about what makes Whirlwind my number one, is the combination between her representing both the unicorn and the dragon mythological creatures, and it's that combination that makes her so powerful and distinctive in the same vein as Sunburn. Plus, it does help that there is a lot of dragon physical features implemented into her design, and I am a huge fan of dragons. I love the idea of dragons, their power, their size. And so naturally, seeing dragons in media just makes me very pumped, and the Skylanders is no different. So moving on from my natural bias towards dragons, Whirlwind Here is very clearly a unicorn with a distinguishing horn on her head of all things, which shoots rainbows. And of course, you know, unicorns and folklores are often around unicorns. In fact, it's very difficult to find artwork of unicorns without a rainbow in sight somewhere, just because the two ideologies just compare so well that they are associated with one another. They draw parallels with one another, so rainbows being incorporated into Whirlwind's design makes such an excellent representation of a unicorn and the dragon at the same time, and it makes it distinguishable as a Skada as well, because there are no other dragons with feathered like wings to this capacity. There is no other dragons that combine the idea of a unicorn and a dragon into one. And naturally, that gives her a very sharp and contrasting colour palette from, you know, the multicoloured horn you can see on her head right here to the blues and the whites of the rest of the design. So overall, I have a natural bias to this design. It looks awesome, and Whirlwind's gameplay is some of the best since her rainbow attacks are very ranged. They arch so they can hit enemies from above, giving her excellent advantages over them. And overall, she's really fun and incredibly useful because she heals up other Skyders as well. So naturally, that makes you want to play as her and want to level her up to earn that ability. But that's going to bring it to a close, mind you. So I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. But until it memorizes, a peace.